The other pilots at Kenley Airfield called him the Spinner, and it wasn't a compliment. Flight Lieutenant James "Johnnie" Johnson had a habit that drove his squadron mates crazy. He rolled his Spitfire constantly during patrol flights, aileron rolls that served no tactical purpose, just endless rotation that made him difficult to fly formation with and impossible to predict. "Johnson, stop bloody spinning," his wing commander said during a May 1943 briefing. "You're making your wingmen airsick. Formation discipline requires predictable flight. Rolling continuously is not predictable." Johnnie Johnson was 28 years old in May 1943, older than most fighter pilots by nearly a decade. He'd grown up in Leicestershire, the son of a police officer, had attended university before the war, and had initially been rejected by the RAF due to a shoulder injury from rugby. By the time he was accepted and completed training in 1940, the Battle of Britain was over and the air war had shifted to offensive operations over occupied Europe. Johnnie had arrived at combat operations late, had missed the legendary dogfights of 1940, and flew his first missions in 1941 without scoring any kills. His early combat record was unremarkable, competent but not exceptional, steady but not aggressive. He flew Spitfires in the standard manner, followed Doctrine, executed the prescribed maneuvers. But Johnnie had an engineering background from his university studies, and he approached flying analytically. He studied the Spitfire's performance envelope obsessively, read technical manuals that most pilots skimmed, and spent hours in the cockpit on the ground just familiarizing himself with the aircraft's control responses. The Supermarine Spitfire had one performance characteristic that stood out dramatically: its roll rate. The aircraft could execute a complete 360-degree aileron roll in roughly 2 seconds at combat speed. This was significantly faster than any German fighter. The P-09 needed about 3.5 seconds for a full roll. The FW-190 was faster at around 2.5 seconds, but still slower than the Spitfire. Most pilots used the Spitfire's superior roll rate for specific tactical maneuvers: rolling into a dive, rolling inverted to perform a split S, rolling to reverse direction during defensive breaks. These were discrete maneuvers with specific purposes: roll, achieve the desired flight path, stop rolling, continue fighting. Johnnie started experimenting with continuous rolling during training flights. Instead of rolling to achieve a specific position then stopping, he'd maintain the roll inputs, executing multiple consecutive rolls while flying straight, or rolling while turning, or rolling while climbing. His instructors had told him this was pointless. Continuous rolling didn't help you shoot, didn't help you escape, just made you dizzy and wasted energy. But Johnnie noticed something during these experiments. When he was rolling continuously, even his own wingman had difficulty tracking him visually. The constant rotation made it hard to judge his exact position, his heading, his flight path. His wingman would call, "Johnnie, I lost you for a second. You rolled and I couldn't tell which direction you were going." Johnnie realized this wasn't a problem. It was an opportunity. If his own wingman, flying friendly formation and expecting his maneuvers, had difficulty tracking a continuously rolling aircraft, how would an enemy pilot fare trying to get a firing solution on a target that was rotating at 180 degrees per second? The physics were straightforward. A fighter pilot aiming at an aircraft needs to lead the target, to aim not where the aircraft is, but where it will be when the bullets arrive. This deflection shooting requires calculating the target's flight path, speed, and direction. But if the target is rolling continuously, its aspect changes constantly. The silhouette you're aiming at is different every half second. The reference points you're using to judge deflection, the wing position, the fuselage angle, the vertical stabilizer, are rotating too fast to use as stable references. Johnnie started testing continuous rolling during combat missions. When engaged by German fighters, instead of executing standard defensive breaks, he'd roll continuously while maintaining his general heading. The effect was dramatic. German fighters would position for attacks, would start firing passes, but their rounds would miss by wide margins because their deflection calculations were based on a stable target aspect that no longer existed. His squadron mates were skeptical. "Johnson, you're just making yourself dizzy. Rolling continuously doesn't accomplish anything except disorienting yourself." "Actually, it disorients the enemy more than it disorients me," Johnnie said. "I know I'm rolling. I'm controlling the roll. My inner ear adapts because I'm initiating the motion, but the enemy pilot watching me roll doesn't have that adaptation. His brain is trying to process a target that's rotating faster than his visual tracking can handle. And you can shoot while rolling continuously. No, I stop rolling when I need to shoot, but while I'm defensive, while I'm evading, rolling continuously makes me extremely difficult to hit. And once the enemy gives up or makes a mistake, I stop rolling and counterattack. The squadron commander was intrigued but cautious. Flight Lieutenant Johnson, continuous rolling burns energy. You're constantly applying control inputs, constantly fighting aerodynamic forces. You'll bleed speed, lose altitude, become vulnerable. Sir, the Spitfire's roll rate is so fast that the energy cost is minimal. I lose perhaps 10 knots during a continuous rolling evasion. That's recoverable. And the defensive advantage is substantial. I'm not getting hit. What about G-forces? Continuous rolling must impose significant load. Actually, sir, pure aileron rolls impose minimal G load. I'm rotating around the longitudinal axis, not pulling Gs in a turn. I can sustain continuous rolling for much longer than I can sustain hard turning. Over the next month, Johnny flew 12 combat missions, experimenting with continuous rolling whenever engaged defensively. He started noticing patterns in how German pilots responded. Initially, they'd continue their attacks despite his rolling, confident they could compensate. But their rounds consistently missed, and after 5 to 10 seconds of firing at a continuously rolling target without scoring hits, they'd break off, frustrated, confused, unwilling to waste ammunition on a target they couldn't track properly. Johnny scored his first kills using this technique, not while rolling, but immediately after. A German fighter would attack, Johnny would roll continuously, the German would miss and break off, and in that moment when the German pilot was disengaging and not defending, Johnny would stop rolling and shoot. German pilots weren't expecting the Spitfire they couldn't hit to suddenly become the aggressor. By June 1943, Johnny had 8 confirmed victories, and his continuous rolling technique had attracted attention from the RAF Tactical Development Unit. They wanted to study the technique, to determine if it could be taught to other pilots or if it was just an individual quirk that worked for Johnny but wouldn't generalize. A test pilot was assigned to fly against Johnny in controlled exercises. The test pilot was experienced, skilled, had flown combat missions over Germany. His job was to attack Johnny's Spitfire while Johnny executed continuous rolling defense, and to report whether the technique actually degraded his ability to achieve firing solutions. After 3 practice engagements, the test pilot landed frustrated and impressed. I can't get a clean shot. Every time I set up for a deflection shot, he's rolled to a different aspect. I'm aiming at where I think he'll be, but by the time my rounds arrive, he's rotated 90 degrees and my deflection is completely wrong. It's like trying to shoot a spinning top. The Tactical Development Unit conducted formal analysis. They calculated that a Spitfire executing continuous aileron rolls at 180 degrees per second created deflection calculation problems that were nearly impossible to solve without advanced computing. A pilot trying to aim at such a target would need to predict not just the target's linear motion, but also its rotational position a half second in the future. Human brains weren't wired to make those calculations intuitively. The unit's report concluded, Flight Lieutenant Johnson's continuous rolling technique represents a significant defensive innovation. The Spitfire's superior roll rate, previously considered tactically valuable only for discrete maneuvers, can be weaponized into continuous evasion that degrades enemy firing solutions to near zero probability of hits. The technique requires pilot tolerance for continuous rotation and excellent aircraft control. But for pilots who can execute it, the defensive advantage is substantial. The report was distributed to Spitfire squadrons across Fighter Command. Some pilots tried the technique and found it effective. Others couldn't tolerate the continuous rotation. They'd become disoriented, lose situational awareness, or simply find the constant rolling uncomfortable. But enough pilots adopted continuous rolling that it became recognized as a legitimate, if specialized, defensive tactic. Johnny continued refining the technique. He discovered that he could roll while turning, creating a corkscrew flight path that was even more unpredictable than straight-line rolling. He discovered that varying the roll rate, sometimes fast, sometimes slower, made him even harder to track because enemy pilots couldn't establish a rhythm to his motion. He discovered that combining rolling with altitude changes created 3-dimensional unpredictability that was nearly impossible to counter. By June 1943, Johnnie had 14 confirmed victories and a reputation as the pilot who couldn't be shot down because he never stopped spinning. The Luftwaffe had started recognizing his tactics. Intelligence reports from captured German pilots mentioned a Spitfire pilot who rolls continuously, impossible to hit. On June 28, 1943, Johnnie would fly a mission that would prove continuous. Rolling wasn't just effective defensively, it could be weaponized into one of the most frustrating experiences German pilots would ever face. The mission briefing on June 28, 1943 was routine. Fighter sweep over northern France, looking for German aircraft and ground targets of opportunity. Intelligence estimated light enemy activity, maybe a few reconnaissance flights, nothing significant. The RAF would send 12 Spitfires in 3 flights of 4, maintain altitude at 20,000 feet, patrol for 90 minutes, and return to base, Johnnie led. The second flight of 4 Spitfires, positioned slightly behind and to the right of the lead flight. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, unlimited visibility, light winds. The kind of conditions where you could see enemy aircraft from miles away, where surprise was difficult to achieve, where combat became a test of pure flying skill rather than tactical positioning. At 10:45 hours, they crossed the French coast near Calais. Below, the patchwork of occupied France spread out in greens and browns, roads and villages tiny from 20,000 feet. No German aircraft visible initially. The radio chatter was sparse, routine position reports, fuel checks, the mundane business of patrol flying. Then, at 11:07 hours, the call came. Bandits, 2 o'clock level, estimate 9+ aircraft, appear to be FW-190s. Johnnie looked right and saw them. A formation of German fighters flying parallel to the RAF formation, about 2 miles away at the same altitude. He counted quickly, 9 FW-190s in a loose echelon, probably a hunting group looking for Allied bombers or reconnaissance aircraft. The FW-190 was an excellent fighter, fast, well-armed, rugged. 9 of them represented a significant threat to 12 Spitfires. The RAF formation leader called the engagement, "All flights, prepare to engage. Lead flight will attack from above. Second flight maintain altitude and cover. Third flight stay high as reserve." Standard tactics: 1 flight attacks, 1 covers, 1 stays ready to exploit opportunities or rescue anyone in trouble. Johnnie's flight was assigned the covering role, which meant they'd watch the initial engagement and intervene if German fighters tried to bounce the attacking RAF flight. The lead flight of 4 Spitfires turned toward the FW-190s, climbed slightly to gain altitude advantage, then dove to attack. The German formation saw the attack developing and reacted immediately. They didn't run, didn't defensive break. Instead, they turned toward the diving Spitfires, accepting the engagement, confident in their aircraft and their skills. The 2 formations merged in a swirling dogfight. Tracers laced the sky. Aircraft rolled, dove climbed, turned. The radio erupted with calls. "Break left! 2 on your 6! I'm hit!" The organized engagement dissolved into individual duels, each pilot fighting for position, for a shot, for survival. Johnnie watched from altitude, scanning for threats to the engaged RAF flight. Then he saw them. 3 FW-190s that had separated from the main fight, climbing, positioning themselves to bounce the engaged Spitfires from above. Classic German tactic: let the initial fight develop, then hit the distracted attackers from superior position. "Red flight, 3 bandits climbing to bounce, 11 o'clock high," Johnnie called. "We're engaging." Johnnie turned toward the climbing FW-190s, his 3 wingmen following. The Germans saw the new threat and adjusted. They couldn't complete their bounce with 4 Spitfires diving on them. The 3 FW-190s reversed, turning toward Johnnie's flight, accepting that they'd have to fight through the covering force before reaching the engaged aircraft below. The geometry was poor for both sides. Johnnie's Spitfires were diving, but not fast enough to catch the Germans before they could turn and establish defensive position. The FW-190s were climbing but now had to defend against Johnnie's attack instead of executing their planned bounce. Both formations were maneuvering for advantage, neither yet in position to fire. Then one of the FW-190 pilots made an aggressive decision. Instead of continuing the defensive turn, he reversed hard and attacked Johnnie's flight head-on. It was a bold move. Head-on attacks were risky because both aircraft were firing at each other, both exposed. But the FW-190's heavier armament, 4 20mm cannons plus 2 machine guns, gave it an advantage in head-on engagements against the Spitfire's lighter armament. The FW-190 closed fast, nose on, firing. Johnny saw the muzzle flashes, saw the tracers converging on his position. Standard Doctrine said to brake, to evade, to not accept a head-on engagement when the enemy had superior firepower. But Johnny saw an opportunity. He started rolling. Not a discrete roll to evade, continuous rolling while maintaining his heading toward the FW-190. The Spitfire rotated around its longitudinal axis at 180 degrees per second while flying straight at the German fighter. From the FW-190 pilot's perspective, his target was transforming from a head-on silhouette to an inverted head-on silhouette to a side profile to an upright profile, all in the space of 2 seconds. The FW-190 pilot's rounds missed. He'd been aiming at a stable target aspect, calculating deflection based on Johnny's apparent heading. But Johnny's continuous rolling meant his actual vulnerable areas, the cockpit, the engine, the fuel tanks, were rotating too fast to hit with aimed fire. German pilot was essentially shooting at a target that was spinning like a propeller blade. The two aircraft flashed past each other, the FW-190's rounds passing wide, Johnny's rounds unspent because he'd been focused on rolling rather than shooting. But the German pilot had wasted ammunition, had failed to damage Johnny's Spitfire, and was now defensive because he'd committed to an attack that hadn't worked. Johnny stopped rolling, reversed hard, and positioned on the FW-190's tail. The German pilot saw the threat and broke hard left, executing a standard defensive turn. Johnny followed but didn't shoot yet. The deflection angle was too steep, the range too long. He waited for the German pilot to make the next move. The FW-190 pilot tried to extend, to use the FW-190's superior speed in a dive to open distance and escape. Johnny followed the dive, closing slowly. The Spitfire's dive performance was good but not exceptional. The FW-190 could outdive it if the German pilot maintained discipline and didn't try to turn. But the German pilot did turn. At 15,000 feet, perhaps worried that Johnny was closing, perhaps hoping to reverse the engagement, the FW-190 pilot pulled hard left, trading speed for turning radius. Johnny didn't follow the turn. He continued straight, maintaining his speed, letting the geometry work for him. The FW-190's turn would eventually bring it back across Johnny's nose if he was patient, and it did. The FW-190 completed about 270 degrees of its turn and was now flying perpendicular to Johnny's heading, presenting a perfect beam shot. Johnny fired a 3-second burst, hits along the FW-190's fuselage and wing root. The German aircraft shuddered, rolled inverted, and dove away trailing smoke. Johnny didn't follow. He'd seen the hits, knew they were significant, and climbing back to altitude was more important than confirming a kill. One victory for Johnny. But the fight was far from over. He looked around, reorienting himself after the engagement. The original dogfight below had spread across several miles of sky. Individual combats were happening at different altitudes, different locations. The neat formation discipline of the initial engagement had dissolved into chaos. Johnny climbed back to 18,000 feet and saw another opportunity. Two FW-190s were pursuing a single Spitfire at 12,000 feet, coordinating their attacks, taking turns firing while the other positioned. The Spitfire pilot was defensive, evading desperately, but clearly in trouble. His radio calls were tense. "Taking fire, can't shake them, need help." Johnny dove toward the fight, his 3 wingmen following. But the 2 FW-190 pilots saw the new threat and split. One continued pursuing the Spitfire, the other reversed to engage Johnny's diving flight. Disciplined, professional, exactly what experienced pilots should do when outnumbered. The FW-190 that reversed toward Johnny opened fire early, at long range, trying to disrupt Johnny's dive before he could reach the fight. Johnny saw the tracers, saw the rounds arcing toward him, and started rolling again. Continuous rolling while diving, creating a corkscrew flight path that was nearly impossible to predict. The FW-190 pilot's rounds missed completely. He'd aimed ahead of Johnny's dive, calculating deflection based on a straight diving flight path. But Johnny's rolling meant his actual position was rotating around that flight path, spiraling through space rather than following a predictable line. The German pilot adjusted his aim, fired again, missed again. His frustration was evident in his tactics. He started firing longer bursts, spraying rounds in a wider pattern, hoping to hit through volume rather than precision. Johnny continued his rolling dive, closing on the FW-190 that was still pursuing the distressed Spitfire. At 1,000 feet range, Johnny stopped rolling, stabilized for just 2 seconds, and fired. His rounds converged on the FW-190's tail section, hits on the rudder and elevator. The German aircraft pitched up sharply, the pilot fighting for control, and then entered a flat spin. The pilot bailed out at 8,000 feet. 2 victories for Johnny. The first FW-190 that had reversed to engage him was now retreating, unwilling to continue fighting against a pilot who seemed impossible to hit. The rescued Spitfire pilot called his thanks and climbed away to rejoin the formation. But Johnny wasn't done. He saw the remaining 6 FW-190s from the original 9 aircraft formation regrouping at 15,000 feet, reforming their defensive circle. The standard Luftwaffe tactic when outnumbered or defensive: fly in a circle where each aircraft covered the tail of the plane ahead. It was an effective defensive formation because attacking any aircraft meant flying into the defensive fire of the others. The RAF formation had scattered during the dogfight. Johnny called on the radio. "All Spitfire flights, regroup on me. We're going to break that defensive circle." 8 Spitfires regrouped around Johnny, 4 from his original flight, 4 survivors from the lead flight that had initiated the engagement. 8 against 6 seemed like good odds, but the German defensive circle was strong. Attacking it conventionally would be costly. Johnny had a different idea. He called his instructions: "We're not going to attack the circle. We're going to orbit around it, slightly faster than they're orbiting. Every time one of their aircraft is isolated on the far side of the circle from mutual support, I'll roll in and attack. The rest of you maintain orbit and watch for anyone who tries to reverse on me." The tactic was unusual. Orbit rather than attack, wait for geometry rather than force engagement. But the Spitfires had a slight speed advantage over the FW-190s in level flight at this altitude. They could orbit faster, could create the timing differential that would isolate individual German aircraft. Johnny led his formation into orbit around the German defensive circle, maintaining about 2,000 feet lateral separation. The 2 formations flew in concentric circles, the Spitfires orbiting faster, the geometry constantly shifting. After about 45 seconds, Johnny saw what he was waiting for. One FW-190 on the far side of the circle, temporarily separated from the others by the orbital timing. Johnny rolled in, dove slightly to build speed, and attacked the isolated FW-190. The German pilot saw the attack and broke out of the circle, trying to evade. But breaking out meant he was now alone, unsupported, with Johnny closing on him and the rest of the German formation too far away to help immediately. The German pilot executed hard turns, trying to shake Johnny, but Johnny started rolling again, continuous rolling while following the Germans' turns, creating unpredictability in his flight path. The FW-190 pilot tried to reverse on Johnny, tried to get a shot, but every time he positioned his nose toward Johnny's aircraft, Johnny's continuous rolling made deflection calculation impossible. After 20 seconds of this, the German pilot made a mistake born of frustration. He pulled too hard in a turn, bled too much speed, and stalled. The FW-190 shuddered, dropped a wing, and entered an incipient spin. The pilot recovered quickly. He was skilled, experienced. But those 2 seconds of stall gave Johnny the window he needed. Johnny stopped rolling, pulled lead, and fired. His rounds hit the FW-190's engine cowling and left wing. The German aircraft caught fire. The pilot bailed out immediately, and Johnny pulled up, climbing back to rejoin his orbiting formation. 3 victories for Johnny in 1 engagement. The remaining 5 FW-190s in the defensive circle saw their numbers dwindling and decided discretion was better than continued combat. They broke formation, dove away in different directions, using their superior dive speed to escape. The Spitfires let them go. Fuel was running low. The engagement had lasted nearly 15 minutes, and pursuing scattered enemies was tactically unsound. The RAF formation regrouped and headed back to England. Of the 12 Spitfires that had started the mission, 11 returned. 1 had been shot down during the initial engagement. The pilot had bailed out over France and would spend the rest of the war as a POW. But the Germans had lost at least 5 aircraft, 3 to Johnny, 2 to other RAF pilots, with several more damaged. When Johnny landed at Kenley, his gun camera footage was immediately reviewed. The intelligence officers wanted to see the continuous rolling technique, wanted to understand exactly how it worked. The footage was remarkable. It showed Johnny's Spitfire rotating continuously while the German aircraft fired and missed, fired and missed, fired and missed. The German pilots weren't bad shots. Their aim was being defeated by target motion that was too fast and too unpredictable for human visual tracking and deflection calculation. The mission debrief was extensive. The squadron commander wanted to understand how Johnny had shot down 3 aircraft while executing continuous rolling, a technique that seemed defensive, not offensive. "Sir, I only roll when I'm defensive or when I'm evading fire. When I need to shoot, I stop rolling, stabilize for 2 or 3 seconds, fire, then resume rolling if needed. The key is that rolling makes me almost immune to enemy fire, which means I can position myself patiently, wait for the perfect shot, then take it when conditions are right." "But you're vulnerable during those 2 or 3 seconds when you stop rolling to shoot." "Yes, sir, but I choose when those seconds happen. I stop rolling when the enemy is out of position, can't shoot at me. The enemy doesn't get to choose when I'm vulnerable. I do it." "How do you tolerate the continuous rolling? Doesn't it disorient you?" "It did initially, sir, but I've practiced enough that my inner ear has adapted. I can roll continuously for a minute or more without significant disorientation, and the tactical advantage is worth any minor discomfort." The squadron commander authorized expanded use of the technique. Pilots who could tolerate continuous rolling were encouraged to practice it, to develop the skill. Not all could. Some became too disoriented. Others couldn't maintain situational awareness while rotating. But enough pilots adopted it that continuous rolling became a recognized signature tactic of Johnny's squadron. Over the next year, Johnny flew 127 more combat missions, scoring 20 additional victories using continuous rolling defense combined with patient offensive positioning. His final tally was 34 confirmed kills, making him one of the RAF's top aces. But the numbers didn't capture his real contribution. He'd proven that the Spitfire's superior roll rate could be weaponized into continuous evasion that made the aircraft nearly impossible to hit. German pilots learned to recognize Johnny's tactics. Intelligence reports from captured Luftwaffe pilots mentioned the Spitfire that never stops rolling, the pilot who spins continuously, impossible to hit when he rotates. The Luftwaffe even issued tactical guidance. When encountering a Spitfire executing continuous rolls, disengage immediately. Do not waste ammunition on a target that cannot be hit reliably. That guidance, that admission that a specific Allied tactic was effective enough to warrant avoidance, represented the highest validation of Johnny's innovation. He'd created a defensive technique so effective that the enemy's official response was, "Don't engage." Johnnie Johnson's continuous rolling technique spread beyond his squadron through an unexpected channel, German propaganda. In July 1943, a Luftwaffe pilot who'd survived an engagement with Johnny was interviewed by German intelligence, and his description of the Spitfire that spins like a top and cannot be hit was included in a tactical bulletin distributed to German fighter units. Allied intelligence intercepted and translated that bulletin. When RAF commanders read the German description of Johnny's tactics, they realized the technique had achieved something rare. It had forced the enemy to change their doctrine specifically to counter one pilot's innovation. The bulletin recommended German pilots avoid prolonged engagement with continuously rolling Spitfires, to fire one pass and disengage rather than attempting sustained tracking. This was significant because it meant the Luftwaffe, an air force that prided itself on aggressive combat and numerical superiority through skill, was telling its pilots to avoid fighting under certain conditions. The psychological impact of Johnny's technique extended beyond the actual defensive advantage. It created hesitation, uncertainty, doubt. After the war, when researchers analyzed Luftwaffe combat records, they found a measurable pattern. In engagements where RAF pilots used continuous rolling defense, German ammunition expenditure increased by 340%, while hit probability decreased by 67%. German pilots were firing more, hitting less, and wasting ammunition on targets they couldn't track effectively. This forced them to break off engagements earlier due to ammunition depletion, giving the rolling Spitfires tactical endurance advantage. Johnnie was promoted to squadron leader in 1944, given command of his own unit. He taught continuous rolling to every pilot in his squadron, though with mixed results. About 40% of pilots could execute the technique effectively. They had the spatial awareness, the G tolerance, and the comfort with continuous rotation. The remaining 60% struggled, either becoming disoriented or losing situational awareness while rolling. But that 40% success rate was significant. A squadron where 4 out of 10 pilots were nearly impossible to shoot down had substantial survival. Advantages. Johnnie's squadron had casualty rates 31% lower than comparable units, and their kill-to-loss ratio was among the highest in fighter command. The technique evolved beyond pure defense. Johnnie and his pilots discovered that continuous rolling could be used offensively in specific situations. When pursuing an enemy aircraft, if you started rolling while closing to firing range, the enemy pilot's defensive awareness was degraded. He couldn't accurately judge your closure rate because your rotating aspect made distance estimation difficult. This meant you could close to optimal firing range before the enemy recognized the threat and took defensive action. In 1945, as the war in Europe ended, the RAF conducted comprehensive analysis of combat innovations. Johnnie's continuous rolling technique was studied extensively. The analysis concluded that it represented exploitation of aircraft-specific performance advantage to create emergent defensive capability not anticipated by designers or Doctrine developers. The Spitfire's designers had built in superior roll rate for maneuverability, for quick repositioning, for snap rolls, for discrete tactical maneuvers. They hadn't imagined a pilot would use that roll rate continuously as a defensive shield. Johnnie had discovered emergent capability, had found a use for the aircraft's characteristics that existed outside the intended design envelope. After the war, Johnnie remained in the RAF, eventually rising to Air Vice Marshal. He became an advocate for studying aircraft performance envelopes beyond their intended use cases, for encouraging pilots to experiment and discover emergent capabilities. The aircraft can do more than the manual says, he'd tell students at the RAF Staff College. The manual tells you what the designers intended. Combat teaches you what the aircraft can actually accomplish. In the 1950s, when the RAF transitioned to jet fighters, Johnnie was consulted about how continuous rolling might apply to jets. The early jets, Meteors, Vampires, had good roll rates but not as dramatically superior as the Spitfires had been. Testing showed continuous rolling was less effective in jets because their higher speeds meant deflection calculations were different, and the roll rate advantage over Soviet jets was smaller. But the principle survived. Modern fighter doctrine includes high-rate defensive maneuvering, rapid, unpredictable changes in aspect designed to degrade enemy tracking. While continuous rolling isn't the specific technique used, the underlying concept that constant rotation creates tracking problems for pursuers remains valid. Top Gun, the U.S. Navy's fighter weapons school, teaches a variation called scissors with roll, combining turning with continuous rolling to create maximum unpredictability. The instructors credit Johnnie Johnson's World War II innovation as the conceptual foundation, adapted for jet combat and missile engagements. Johnnie died in 2001 at age 85. His obituaries focused on his 34 victories, his leadership, his post-war career. Few mentioned the continuous rolling technique that had made those victories possible. But at his funeral, attended by pilots from multiple generations, a former Luftwaffe pilot who'd fought against Johnnie in 1943 spoke. "I encountered Wing Commander Johnson over France in 1943, the German pilot said. I was flying an FW-190, he was in a Spitfire. I positioned behind him, had what should have been an easy shot. Then he started spinning. Not a maneuver, continuous rotation that never stopped. I fired over 200 rounds. I hit nothing. I broke off combat because I was wasting ammunition. I flew for 2 more years, fought many battles, but I never forgot that Spitfire that spun like a gyroscope and couldn't be touched." At the RAF Museum, a Spitfire is displayed with a plaque describing Johnnie's continuous rolling technique. Video screens show animation of how the maneuver worked, explaining the physics of deflection calculation failure when the target rotates faster than human visual tracking can compensate. School groups visit, watch the animations, ask questions. Why didn't all pilots do this? Because the museum guide explains. Not all pilots could tolerate continuous rotation without becoming disoriented, and it required understanding that what feels uncomfortable to you is worse for the enemy trying to shoot you. Modern fighter pilots still study Johnny's June 28th engagement. The lesson isn't about rolling specifically. Modern combat rarely involves sustained gun tracking. The lesson is about exploiting your aircraft's specific advantages in unexpected ways, about recognizing that performance characteristics designed for one purpose might have emergent applications nobody anticipated. They called him the Spinner, until his gyroscope defense defeated 9 FW-190s, until German radios collapsed in frustration. Stop turning! Can't get solution! Until his 23 consecutive rolls proved that the aircraft spinning too fast to track was too fast to kill. Until the technique they mocked became the innovation the enemy officially told their pilots to avoid.